Welcome to Comfort Crime with Lindsay Sanchez, a cozy mystery podcast where no actual crimes have been committed. If this is your first time here, please start with episode 1, chapter 1. The link is in the show notes below. For everyone else, we'll continue with chapter 3 today. But first, an update. I'm still reading the Crime Brulee Bake Off. It's so fun. My hold on the audiobook expired, so I had to switch to good old-fashioned reading, which I love, but it's a lot slower, especially since I can't do it while I'm driving or making cookies. And if you want to know what I think about it, the book, I love making cookies. If you want to know what I think about the book, you'll have to join my newsletter, where I send out book recommendations, writing updates, and my latest podcast episodes. I will have the link in the show notes. Other than that, I am so excited to share with you a few writing updates. At the beginning of Death at Dogwood Lake, I did say this was going to be a short story, but it's officially grown into a novella that is just a little bit longer than a short story. And this mystery has been so fun, and these characters have so much to say that it's just longer than I anticipated. But the real news is about the book that follows. This novella, Death at Dogwood Lake, is a prequel to the real book, the book that I'm writing about Georgia and Jake's story when they're older. I love the story that is coming together for them, but I especially love the love story. In a book, inspiration comes from so many places, but one of the main sources for this book is a song. And I can't tell you which one yet because it would give too much away, but when the book comes out, I'll be interested to see if anyone can guess it. And if you want to guess preemptively, feel free to email me. Just respond to my newsletter. Email me, and if you guess it right, I will tell you. Today, we'll continue with Death at Dogwood Lake, a short story about Georgia Lennox, whose perfect first date turns into a perfect nightmare when she discovers a dead body. And instead of finding romance, she's pulled into a murder investigation where her hometown secrets run deeper than the alpine lake where it all started. Last time, we finished chapter 2. Here's a quick recap. What begins as a birthday picnic for Georgia at Dogwood Lake quickly turns into a horror show when she discovers a dead body floating in the water and a Dogwood Lake Community College hat next to it. A mysterious crack from across the lake and movement in the distant trees alerts Georgia and Jake that they might not be alone and that the death could be suspicious. Prioritizing escape, Georgia insists that they need to leave, but her muddy sandals make movement difficult. Jake dismisses her concerns about the victim's slim chance of survival and the potential danger from whatever they saw in the trees. He carries her on his back down the mountain, determined to get her to safety before attempting to call for help. At the car, Jake tries to send Georgia home alone for her safety while he waits for the police. Georgia refuses to leave him. She's suspicious about the movement, and she insists they face the situation together. When he finally agrees, she dials 911. Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 3. Sirens screamed into the parking lot, a low-riding minivan tailing behind. Officer Lennox, Georgia thought. Apparently, whether you're on duty or not, if your daughter calls 911, you get notified. Sienna, he said, by way of explanation as he handed Georgia a pair of socks and her favorite sneakers, with a look that said they would talk about her sneaking out later. She pulled the socks over her dusty feet and shoved on the shoes while officers questioned Jake. "We've called your parents," Georgia's dad told Jake. "They'll meet us up top." Before she knew it, Georgia and Jake were hiking back up the mountain with 2 uniformed officers leading the way and her dad bringing up the rear. Jake marched beside her, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Any sign of the happy-go-lucky young man from earlier had vanished completely. With every step, Georgia's stomach tightened. She didn't want to hike up the mountain. She really didn't want to go back to the lake. This time, she couldn't close her eyes and pretend like nothing was happening. She couldn't avoid the steps where she and Jake had held hands for the first time, or the living wall of colors and blossoms where he had taken her breath away. It wasn't quite real yet. At any moment, she'd wake up from the dream-turned-nightmare and see Sienna standing over her, telling her she'd been talking in her sleep again. It wasn't real yet. It probably wouldn't be until she knew who was in the lake. For Jake, it seemed real. He'd seen something up there that had transformed him into this shell of himself. The body was terrifying. There was no doubt about that. When Georgia closed her eyes, all she could see was the soft, lifeless lump and that hat floating next to it. The Dogwood Lake Community College logo drifting on the waveless lake. That logo, that gold circle with the head of a bulldog in the center, that had to be what was bothering Jake. His dad was a professor at the community college. "Jake," she whispered, when it seemed like none of the adults were paying attention. "Do you think it's your dad in the lake?" How had it taken her so long to see the connection? Jake jerked his head up, startled. "No. Why would you ask that?" I know your dad works there." "Yeah," he said, "but he's at the garden center today." Jake went back to his marching, forcing every step. Maybe it was the loss of innocence of Jake's favorite childhood spot, the place that held so many memories for him. Or maybe he was lying, trying to protect her. Maybe he really was worried it was his dad in the water. Whatever was wrong with him, it seemed like he was already grieving, like he already knew who was in the lake. "What did you see up there?" Jake didn't take his eyes off the trail. "I don't know." Georgia thought about the shadow and the flash of gold between the trees. It could have been a bobcat. They've been spotted in the area. "Yeah," he agreed, with no conviction. He knew as well as she did that whatever they saw by the lake was no bobcat. "A person?" Jake shrugged. "If it was a person, then whatever happened up there?" She trailed off, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. If someone was up there, then this wasn't an accident. Jake finished her unspoken thought, the thought she'd wanted to leave unsaid. Because if this wasn't an accident, that must mean murder? She whispered like just saying the word could summon a killer. Jake shrugged again, reduced to one-sentence replies and non-committal lifts of his shoulder. They rounded the last corner, the lake leaking into view. Georgia slowed her steps. The clearing was silent. No sign of a bobcat, person, or anything else. It's going to be okay. Georgia's dad put his hand on her shoulder, guiding her and Jake to the abandoned picnic table. It was worse, seeing it all like this for a second time. The spilt chocolate milk, the flies on the donuts Jake had laid out for them. An eerie unease filled the silent clearing. "Stay here," Georgia's dad said, switching into Officer Lennox mode. He walked around them, unholstering his gun as he slowly made his way toward the body. "Fan out," Georgia's dad ordered. The officers unholstered their guns and combed through the trees. "I'm sorry," Jake whispered. His hand nudged hers as they stood side by side, and the officers crept closer to the body. "I'm gonna guess this isn't your fault." Georgia slipped her hand into his to reassure him. "So there's nothing to apologize for." Jake nodded and swallowed hard. He didn't believe it, and there was clearly more he wanted to say, but he didn't. "Clear! Clear!" each officer said as they returned to the lake and holstered their guns. "Set up a perimeter," Georgia's dad said. "I want to preserve those footprints." One of the officers, Georgia thought his name was Steve. She'd met most of them, said hello at barbecues and Christmas parties, but she hadn't paid much attention. If his kids were here, she'd recognize them much easier. The officer, who was probably Steve, pulled out a roll of yellow caution tape and, starting at the picnic table, wound it around the edge of the water, using trees as posts. The yellow circle ringed around the lake like a sun with the hole in the middle. A sun with something missing. "I'm going to approach the body from this side," Georgia's dad said. "That way, my footprints will be clearly distinguishable." The junior officer next to him handed him a pair of gloves. Officer Lennox approached the body, and with one gloved hand, he felt for a pulse. He shook his head, pulled his hand away, and said, "We'd better call for backup. Let's take some pictures and don't touch anything else until the detectives get here." "What in the name of this mountain is going on here?" a woman called out from behind them. Jake and Georgia jumped, their hands automatically pulling apart as they turned to face Jake's mom. Laura Meadows was a petite woman with straight black hair cut to her shoulders and big black eyes ringed with eyeliner. Even in this early morning, she looked beautiful. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Jake stepped forward and gave her a hug. Laura pulled him towards her, away from the ruined picnic and the body in the lake. "Jackie, are you okay?" She bent his face down to look at it. "Are you hurt? The police called and said someone got hurt." "I'm okay, Mom. Where's Dad?" Jake stood up, looking around like he expected his dad to appear. "Your father went on a bike ride this morning. He might be on this mountain somewhere." Laura waved her hand like it didn't matter where Jake's dad was. Her only concern was for her son. "And you?" Laura started towards Georgia. Keeping one hand on Jake, she took Georgia's hand in her other. Jake and Georgia were already taller than her, but she stood between them like a bridge. "I'm fine, Mrs. Meadows. Thank you." "Who's in the lake?" Laura called to George's dad and Officer Steve as they circled the body, taking pictures, documenting every angle. "We don't know yet, Mrs. Meadows," Officer Lennox called back. "Actually, can you get these kids out of here? We can question them back at the house later." "I'm not leaving until I know who's in the lake." Laura shook her head, still clutching both Jake and George's hands. Maybe she wondered if it was her husband in the lake, whose hat had fallen. But the hat wasn't there. It wasn't floating next to the body. Maybe the wind had blown it. Maybe it had gotten so waterlogged that it sunk to the bottom. But as far as Georgia could see, there was no hat, no Dogwood Community College logo. "Please," George's dad called back to Laura, "can you just take the kids home? Can you please just take the kids home? We'll let you know as soon as we have more information, I promise." Laura didn't budge, not a single inch. She stood between the two teenagers and waited. Officer Steve looked at George's dad questioningly, who gave him a slight nod. "Just try not to disturb it as much as possible." Officer Steve put on a pair of gloves and made his way toward the body. He slipped in his mud on the way, catching himself on a log before going all the way down. He wasn't the youngest of the three officers, but he wasn't quite as old as George's dad either. A slip like that would give him a nasty bruise, but there wouldn't be any lasting damage. Officer Steve lifted one shoulder, just enough that George's dad could zoom in and catch a picture of the face hiding in the shadows. "Got it," George's dad called out, signaling for Officer Steve to make his way back. George's dad clicked a few buttons and zoomed in on the screen. "It's Tom," he called to Laura. "Tom Harding." "I've got more footprints over here," the other officer, the youngest of the three, called from across the lake, his perimeter check only half complete. "And some sort of tire marks, like some sort of mountain bike. Looks like someone else has been up here." Officer Lennox turned to Laura. "Now, can you please take these kids home?" Laura finally let go of their hands, crossed herself like she was saying a prayer for Tom. She expected Jake and Georgia to follow, and they did. But any amount that Jake had loosened since his mom arrived tightened back up. He was closed off again. They knew it wasn't his dad in the lake, so that couldn't be what was bothering him. Finding a body was enough of an excuse to be in shock, if that's what it was. Georgia was probably in shock. She couldn't really think about it. But for Jake, it seemed like there was something else. And then it hit her, like an early frost killing tender spring blossoms. Jake wasn't worried it was his dad in the lake. He wasn't worried his dad was the one that died. Jake Meadows was worried that his dad was the killer. And if she and Jake had put the clues together so quickly, it wouldn't be long before her dad and the other officers did as well. This has been Death at Dogwood Lake, Chapter 3. Thank you so much for being here today. I had so much fun, and I'm already excited for next week.